Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'll go ahead and get started in just 1 minute as we let folks continue to join. Okay, good morning. Thanks so much for being here. I am Katie Peshek. I'm a senior communications officer at the Colorado Health Foundation, and we are so excited that you're able to join us today for a presentation about Pulse, our annual statewide poll that we conduct through the foundation. Before we dive in, if we can just go to the next slide, we just have a few quick housekeeping notes for everyone. We'll start with a walkthrough of our Spanish language interpretation features and more information about the Foundation's commitment to language justice. And for that, I'm going to turn it over now to our partners at the Community Language Cooperative to explain how interpretation will work during today's webinar. So, B, please go ahead and take it away.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie. Good morning, everybody. My name is B. Torres. My pronouns are she, her, ella, and I will be one of your interpreters. I'm here with my colleague Diego Pons from the CLC, the Community Language Cooperative. And we want to thank you, as always, for your commitment to language justice, which means that everyone has the right to speak and be heard in the language of their hearts. To accomplish this today, Diego and I will be interpreting simultaneously through Zoom's interpretation function. In a moment, we'll activate the Zoom interpretation function, and you'll see a globe icon appear at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see that globe icon, you will see three dots that say more, and you'll be able to select interpretation through that menu as well. Once you click on either one of those menus, you'll be able to choose interpretation and then English or Spanish as the language of your heart. I want to remind folks to please speak at a conversational pace so that Diego and I are able to capture your message accurately. I'll go ahead and repeat these instructions in Spanish and then we can get started. Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Torres, mi pronombre es ella y yo seré su intérprete con la CLC o la Community Language Cooperative y les agradecemos su compromiso con la justicia del lenguaje. Estoy aquí con mi colega Diego Pons y juntos vamos a interpretar simultáneamente a través de la herramienta de interpretación de Zoom. En un momento vamos a activar la interpretación y aparecerá un globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Si no aparece ese globo terráqueo, va a ver un botón que dice More o más con tres puntitos. Puede hacer clic en estos iconos y escoger inglés o español como el idioma de su corazón. Les recordamos que por favor hablen a un ritmo de conversación para poder brindar una interpretación precisa de su mensaje. Muchas gracias, ya comenzaremos. Thank you very much. We can get started.
Thank you so much, B. We so appreciate you and the CLC team for being here with us today. Just a couple other notes before we begin. Today's briefing is being recorded, and so we will send that out via email after the briefing, and it can also be accessed. The recording will be available on our Pulse website at copulsepoll.org. Closed captioning is available using the control bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have any technical issues with the briefing today, please use the chat function to reach out to our team so we can help you troubleshoot. And we also really welcome your participation. We hope this feels interactive and you're able to ask your questions. So please use the chat function to share your thoughts or your questions throughout the session, and we will hold time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So on the next slide, just a little bit about us before we dive in. For those who may not be familiar, the Colorado Health Foundation, we are a statewide philanthropic organization. We champion the health and well-being of every Coloradan by advocating for and investing in solutions that advance health equity and racial justice. Our work is really grounded in the belief that health and well-being should be in reach for everyone. And Pulse is just one of the tools that we use to listen to and partner with communities around the state. Um,
And Katie,
so
sorry to interrupt
yeah,
you. The interpretation hasn't been activated yet, so if we could pause for a moment so we can.
no problem. I'm happy to. Here to get started. Okay, we've got it. Thank you, B. I'm glad you just let me know. So yeah, that's a little bit more about the Colorado Health Foundation. And on the next slide, a little bit more for us about Pulse. So the Colorado Health Foundation launched Pulse in 2020. It's an annual poll that takes the pulse of people all across the state of Colorado to better understand their perspectives and the issues that are impacting their health and well-being. Pulse is not a single issue poll. We ask about a whole wide range of topics, and we also invite people to share kind of in their own words about the most serious issues facing our state and what matters to them. Through this poll, we gain insights into how people are feeling and what they're concerned about. And then we try to share those results with as many people as possible, policymakers, community leaders, the media, to really help inform both our work at the foundation as well as policy happening across the state. In keeping with that commitment to transparency, all the poll data is publicly available and will be posted on our website at copulsepoll.org. We have a fantastic interactive dashboard that allows you to sort of go through and slice and dice the data as you need. And also, in keeping with our commitment to racial justice at the foundation, we intentionally oversample key communities in Colorado, including Black Coloradans, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans in Colorado, which helps us to ensure that the experiences and perspectives of those communities are meaningfully represented in that data. After today's session, we will host another briefing in September that'll focus on the data as it relates to Hispanic and Latino Coloradans. And that session will be presented in Spanish with live interpretation in English. And we'll also host a conversation in early August that digs deeper into healthcare related data in the poll. We're doing that with our partners at Colorado Community Health Network. And registration for both of those briefings will be coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. So with that, I'm very excited to turn it over to the main portion of our program today. We're so lucky to work with a wonderful bipartisan team of researchers that lead our poll every year. Please help me welcome Lucia Del Pupo and Lori Weigel. They're the research team that conducts the Pulse poll on behalf of the Colorado Health Foundation, and they will be walking folks through the data. So Lori and Lucia, over to you.
Thanks so much, Katie, and it's a pleasure to be here today. So, as Katie noted, my name is Lucia Del Pupo. I'm a senior vice president with FM3 Research. I'm joined today by my colleague, Lori Weigel, the founder of New Bridge Strategy, and together we form a bipartisan research team who has had the luck and privilege of working on this project since it started in 2020. So, I'm going to start us off today, and Lori then will take over about halfway through. But before we dive into some of the key findings and all the interesting data, I did really want to touch on the methodology. And this has been a pretty consistent methodology over the past several years. We use a dual mode approach to conduct interviews among Colorado adults, 18 and over. So we do interviews by telephone and online. We reach out to folks by landline, cell phone, email invitation, text invitations, and even postcard invitations to take the survey online. And this way we achieve a sample of more than 2,000 adult Coloradans. We do include oversamples, as Katie noted, of Black and African American Coloradans, Native American, Indigenous, Asian American, and residents of Morgan County. But the data is representative and weighted to align with kind of census and American Community Survey data to be representative of the Colorado population. The survey is conducted in English and in Spanish, and the data that we're going to walk through has a 3.2% margin of error at the 95% confidence level. And also, you'll notice throughout, because we've been able to do this poll for the past 6 years, we have a wealth of data and comparisons over time. And this survey was in the field in mid-March to mid-April. So diving in, I did want to kind of quickly show you a quick map because there's going to be some places where we talk about regional definitions and regional data. And so you can get a sense here of how we broke out the state. And again, the population here represented is going to be proportional to the adults in the various regions. So as we dive into some of the top concerns in Colorado, we asked folks, first of all, about life in Colorado. How likely would they be to recommend Colorado to a friend or a family member as a place to live? We asked them to rank this on a scale of 1 to 10, with a 1 being not at all likely and a 10 being very likely. The average score was a 6.2, so definitely tended more towards positive than negative. And 40% of respondents gave us a rating between 8 and 10. So that essentially means, 40% would pretty strongly recommend life in Colorado. We do see some polarization, right? With 14% saying not at all likely, and 20% saying very likely. So a little bit of a division there and people feeling intensely. But in general, net positive recommendation and likelihood of recommending Colorado. We also asked folks in a few words of their own to tell us what is the most important issue facing the state. And what we do is we let people, this is an open-ended question, people share their opinions, and then what we do is we code them out thematically. We group the different topics. For the second year in a row, we're seeing government and politics really rise to the top as a thing that people are telling us is a major concern for them, followed very closely, and in fact, statistically pretty much the same as cost of living. When we teased out government and politics and what is it about government and politics that people are most concerned about, we saw that by a 2-to-1 margin, they were, 31% mentioned something related to Republican administration, the president, the federal administration. 15% tended to mention an issue with the Democratic leadership and governor. And then we saw, to a lesser extent, some comments about, budgets and trust in government. And there was a lot of general commentary on governance. What we did see, obviously, people can mention more than one topic when we ask this question, so it may add up to more than 100%. But we saw also things that came up, 1 in 10 mentioned housing affordability, just under 1 in 10 mentioned the climate and taxes and water. And then as we go further down the list, we get into some more specific issues. Again, while these percentages seem small because people were volunteering top of mind, we'll see that many of these issues that on this question ranked lower when we ask people how serious they are, they did also kind of resonate with intensity. But people's gut reaction here was really to talk about these two top issues. And you can see an example of some of the things that people are saying. Again, this is not intended to be fully representative, but just to give you a sense of how people are expressing themselves and what they think. They're saying things, telling us that it's too expensive and traffic is horrible, infrastructure problems, schools have low funding, climate change, affordability, water, cost of housing, cost of everything. So you can get a sense here of how people are expressing themselves in this question and what is top of mind for Coloradans. We then asked this question in kind of a similar question, but in a closed-ended format where, actually, I apologize. Before we get into the closed-ended data, I did want to highlight some of the trends over time. And I think, again, this is really striking and we'll talk a lot more about this in this presentation today about how cost of living is such a big concern right now. And it has jumped really notably since 2025. It is up 12 points in this question. The only time it was kind of in the similar range was in 2022. We've also seen comments about climate and the economy overall increase too. While government and politics is the topic that decreased the most in its mentions relative to last year, it still was the #1 thing that people volunteered for this question. So then looking at the closed-ended question, we gave folks a list of potential problems facing the state, and we asked them to rate each as extremely serious, very serious, somewhat serious, or not too serious. And they're ranked here by the percentage who said each was extremely or very serious. As you look at the slide, it may be quite apparent that there is, a kind of a top tier of issue. There's cost of living, cost of housing, and cost of healthcare are all at the very top of this list. You have more than 4 in 5 telling us these are extremely, very serious problems, and a majority saying they're extremely serious. What was quite striking as we dug into the data was the fact that many of these cost of living issues really cut across income levels. So whether someone was at the lowest level of the income spectrum or a higher level of the income spectrum, these were really top concerns for folks. We also see homelessness as a top issue with 3/4 saying that's extremely or very serious. And obviously that issue has ties to cost of living. And then we saw 2/3 mentioning wildfires, natural disasters, jobs, and the economy. A majority also saw cost of childcare, mental health, climate change, drug overdoses, and violence and misconduct from federal immigration officials as very serious problems. Although I will note that last one, you'll see that the intensity on the extremely serious and the not too serious are pretty similar, and that is because that is an issue that tends to be more polarizing. And as we look on the next slide, you'll see a series of issues that fewer than half said were very serious. But again, some of these tend to be kind of more polarizing issues. So we see illegal immigration and mistreatment of immigrants. seen as very serious at similar rates, but that extremely serious and not too serious bars on both of those tend to be comparable because, again, people tend to go to one side or the other on some of these issues. Some of the other things that I think are worth flagging and really interesting, we're seeing kind of for a second year in a row, a disparity where if we ask people about crime in general, 43% say this is very serious, but then if we ask about crime in their neighborhood, it's much lower. And that's a dynamic we saw in prior research. So there's this idea that concern about crime broadly is greater than actually they are worried about in their day-to-day lives in their neighborhoods. Some of the other things on this slide that I think are worth flagging and really interesting in terms of what we saw in the data was that those who tended to be on the lower levels of the income spectrum tended to be more concerned about mental health, they tended to be more concerned about hunger, and they tended to be more concerned about gun violence than did those who were kind of middle or higher income. So next, I'm going to dive in a little bit onto some of the perspectives on state government. This is a new topic that we explored in this year's Pulse poll. And we asked folks about a series of potential goals for state government. We asked people to rank each one as most important and then which one was second most important. And what we saw was that the thing that kind of jumped most commonly as being most important was ensuring taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly and effectively. And a majority actually chose this as first or second option. This was followed closely by responding to the economic concerns of people in Colorado, supporting the health and well-being of people in Colorado. The kind of lower kind of next tier of priorities, which were also very closely clustered, were making Colorado a safe and welcoming place for everyone who lives here and providing transparency to the public and how state government operates. So again, I think thinking about the cost of living concern that people have expressed, and as we'll see a little bit later, kind of the experiences they're having, there is this concern about the economy and kind of effective spending kind of that seems to be really tying in with that. We did kind of take a look at some of this data regionally, and this shows you the percentage who said each was most important by kind of the major regions in the state. And as you can see, these top two goals were pretty consistent across the state. They were the two most important things in pretty much every area. We do see a slight bump in the Eastern Plains and Western Slope in terms of prioritization of ensuring the taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly and effectively, but generally these are kind of the same 1-2 throughout every region. We then followed up this question with asking folks about their satisfaction with how the government was doing on each of these priorities. And what we saw was quite striking. Coloradans are generally dissatisfied with how the government is performing on these goals or these priorities. The one that they were net positive on was making Colorado a safe and welcoming place for everyone who lives here. But again, that was plus 4 points. It was pretty close. 48% satisfied to 44% dissatisfied. Otherwise, they were majority dissatisfied on pretty much every other kind of goal, health and well-being, transparency, ensuring taxpayer dollars are being spent responsibly, and responding to the economic concerns, particularly the economic concerns and taxpayer spending. Those ones kind of had the greatest dissatisfaction and intensity assigned to them. And again, if we look at this regionally, we do see that generally the trend and the dissatisfaction cuts across the regions. We did see that the folks in the Eastern Plains were the least satisfied with ensuring Colorado is a safe and welcoming place with the job being done there relative to some of the other regions in the state. But generally on all of the other metrics, it was pretty comparable and low levels of satisfaction across the board. So let's dive in a little bit more on some of these cost of living topics. So one of the questions we asked last year and we followed up with again this year was this question on whether people were worried about their ability to afford to live in Colorado in the future. And in 2025, 70% told us they were very or somewhat worried. And as of 2026, this number has grown to 76%. I think what was quite striking again when we looked into the data was that this worry was not, concentrated among one segment of the population. We saw that majority concern was really cutting across regions, across income levels, across racial and ethnic groups. Is really a broadly shared sentiment that people are worried about being able to afford to live in Colorado. Um, and when we dig into their kind of financial situation, we've asked folks over the past several years whether their financial situation was that they were living, comfortably and increasing savings, living comfortably but not increasing savings, just getting by financially, or really struggling financially. And what we see is only a quarter of Coloradans are reporting that they are living comfortably and increasing savings. So while it's encouraging that, these numbers haven't gotten worse, there's still, again, only a quarter of folks are telling us that they are accruing savings. And when we dug into the data and looked at kind of the lower levels of income spectrum, particularly those with household incomes under 30,000, as many as 4 and 5 were telling us that they were just getting by or really struggling financially. We also asked a question about how people are doing financially relative to the prior year. So if they're better off, worse off, or about the same situation as they were the previous year. And what we saw was that 24% said they were doing better, 38% said things have been about the same, and 37% are saying they're doing worse. This has remained pretty stable in the past couple of years, and it's slightly better, I would say, even relative to kind of 2022 and 2023 when it peaked at its worst. But it is notable to see that in 2020 and 2021, when we were at the height of the COVID pandemic, we actually had a majority of people saying things were staying about the same. Those who said it was getting better or worse was similar. But since then, we've kind of settled into a little bit of a downward or worse trend for people. And we also asked people about specifically affording food. And what we saw was that 31% said that they worry about being able to always afford food and enough food to feed themselves and their families, with 2/3 not worried. This number has kind of remained relatively steady in the past 2 years. It definitely jumped up in 2022 and got notably worse. And then since then has leveled off a little bit. And on the next slide here, you can see, though, that there are some notable and really key demographic distinctions when we dig into this question. So while the overall number has remained pretty steady, we see that majorities of those with household incomes under $50,000 are worried, particularly those with household incomes under $30,000, or 78% worried about affording food. And you'll recall that that's the same group that earlier told us that 80% of that group told us they were just getting by or really struggling financially. And when we look at it by race and ethnicity, it's striking to see that half of Black and African American Coloradans tell us that they are worried about affording enough food. And similarly, more than 2 in 5 Latino, American Indian, and Alaska Native, and multiracial Coloradans express this level of concern. So I'm going to now pass it back over to my colleague Lori, who's going to walk us through some other details about financial challenges that Coloradans are facing right now.
Great. Thank you, Lucia. I know a number of questions are being asked in the chat about the types of things where we can break into subgroups. We're giving you guys a quick overview today. So there is much, much more that you can dig into on the website. And I know we're going to highlight the very cool thing about Pulse Poll, which is that you're able to look at a lot of these questions by a number of different demographics, including age groups, which we've gotten a couple questions about. So again, Lori Weigel, I'm the principal of Newbridge Strategy, and we're an opinion research firm here in Colorado. So this is one of my favorite surveys because of those very cool features where everybody can kind of break out do some pollster 101 and look at a number of cool subgroups in the data that we often are trying to highlight here, but I just want to give you this quick overview. So one question, one battery of questions that we looked at is asking people, have they experienced a number of things in the past 12 months, in the past year? A couple of these are newer. that we are looking at where they're directing their spending. Have they cut back spending on recreation and entertainment, for example? We've got 3/4 that are indicating today that yes, in the last year they've cut back in that particular area. Similarly, an outright majority saying they're cutting back on making donations to charitable organizations. Now, those may not be quite as dramatic as some of the things that we just looked at and some other sacrifices that people are making. Primarily, we know because of questions we've asked in the past, because of finances. But again, it's significant and it obviously affects the overall state economy. We also have, again, in those more dramatic changes, we've got almost 2 in 5 that say they postpone dental care, postpone medical care, another 3 in 10 saying they postpone mental health care. And then we get to a grouping of about 1 in 5 that are telling us they've skipped or made a late payment on utility bills, that they've had to had their work hours cut back or wages reduced, or skipped or made a late payment on a loan, which is the new category that we looked at this time. We just talked about being concerned about being able to afford food, but we have 17% that said they personally have skipped meals because they couldn't afford food. And just under 1 in 10 have been laid off. Now, I noted that a number of these we have tracked over time. You can see on the next slide that we've got some sort of, they're kind of hovering in nearly the same places on a number of these, that we've kind of gone up and down a few times over the years, 2022 being a high point, 2024, and we're back at some of those previous levels again in 2026. But again, a number of these we're looking at over time, where we're kind of bouncing around in sort of that same hovering in the same area. 29% today have just bumped up to one of the highest levels in terms of postponing some of those care issues that we just talked about a second ago. And if we look at postponing medical or dental care, in 2026, we can see almost half of all Coloradans are telling us they've done one of those things. Some of them have done both, obviously. But again, that overall scope, it's affecting nearly half of Coloradans that are postponing medical or dental care. And when we've asked about that in the past, we've seen that a lot of that is due to finances. Okay, so if we look at these overall and sort of grab those together in terms of seeing not necessarily which specific ones, but just how broad a scope is this affecting people, there's only about a quarter of Coloradans that say, nope, none of these. These have not been affecting me in any way, shape, or sense right now. If we look at those who are in the 1, 2, or 3 categories, that at least 3 of these they've been affected by, then we're at 44% of all Coloradans that have been affected. And then if we look at those who've had to sacrifice at least 4 or more, it's only granted 1% that are in the, yep, all of these have affected me. But if we look at 4 or more, that's 1 in 3 Coloradans. So 1 in 3 Coloradans are really making some sort of trade-off, some sort of sacrifices in terms of these financial challenges in the past year. We have those categories broken out on the next slide. You can see those that have been most dramatically affected. A couple things to note here. They don't tend to have health insurance. They are more likely to be unemployed. And again, this is just who preponderantly is more apt to be in that category than others. So renters tend to be in this category more than other subgroups. Some of the lowest income categories tend to be more likely to be in this, and they tend to have younger children. If we're looking at those who tend to be least effective, say none of those, interestingly, they tend to be somewhat older. They tend to have Medicare, therefore, and men tend to be somewhat more likely to be in that subgroup, but also they tend to have higher incomes. So we're seeing some of those income roles play out across who's having to make some of these sacrifices and who's being more challenged financially. So we know that housing has been a significant concern over the course of the time that we've been conducting this pulse poll. So we're looking at a few questions that we have asked every single year during the pulse poll. So that's on the next slide. When we look at the concern about their ability to afford their rent or mortgage, you can see that we've gone from sort of the lower 20%, which again is not insignificant, but in 2020 and then in 2021, we were hovering in the low 20s. And then suddenly in 2022, lots of things shifted and financial challenges and worries increased more. We're at not the highest point, but one of the higher points that we've been at with 32%, now indicating that they are personally worried they might lose their home or have to move because they can't afford their monthly rent or mortgage. Now, all things are not equal. And so in this red box at the bottom of the slide, you can see it's an outright majority of renters that are concerned about their ability to afford their, in this case, rent, versus only 23% of homeowners. Again, none of those are insignificant. That's broad swaths of Coloradans, but it is notable that big distinction between renters and those who own their own home. Again, if we go to the next slide, you can see that renters are really having to engage a number of what I would call coping mechanisms in order to be able to address these problems to avoid rent increases. So if we look at this, again, keep in mind, this is just among those renters. Again, they were the most concerned already. We've got a number of ways that they're having to deal with this. We've got 28% that are saying they've had to cut back or go without other needs like food or healthcare. We've got another 28% that are saying they're working multiple jobs. One of the more significant is actually that line at the bottom. Sorry, the code is at the bottom. The line is at the very top. It's 34%, and it's gone up substantially. They're saying they're avoiding asking their landlord to address problems because they're afraid of having their rent increased or being evicted. So that's one of the more common coping mechanisms that they're engaging in, but you can see there's a number of different ways that they're trying to deal with this, including charging more on credit cards or taking on high interest debt or falling behind on other bills or payments. And again, we've been tracking these over time. That big jump really has been in avoiding asking their landlord in order to engage in a number of these. If we break those out by income level, on the next slide, we can see that for some of the lower income households, they are really dramatically being affected by a number of these. 3 and 5 say they've fallen behind on other bills or payments because of this, and nearly the same number say they've cut back or gone without other needs like food or health care. So really, all things are not equal. We're seeing that a dramatic impact on lower income Colorado renters having to engage in a number of coping mechanisms here. Now, if we look at why they think we're having these rising housing costs, we asked a number of different aspects of the housing problem and asked people to tell us whether they thought that was a major cause, a minor cause, or not really a cause of people increasingly being unable to afford housing. Now, notably, we have some big distinctions here in terms of, especially when we look at that red bar, which is a major cause. What tops the list tends to be wages not keeping up, in their view, and a concern about large private investors buying up housing stock in order to make a profit on rents and housing. In the middle here, we're seeing about half telling us that landlords raising rents too much or government regulations that make building housing more expensive are major causes. And then the lowest one is actually not enough housing being built in their community. In fact, an outright 2 and 5 believe that that is not a cause. And often when we talk to people in other work that we do, they'll look at new buildings going up and be very concerned about some of the growth that's happening out there. So that may be why we're seeing that dynamic. Now, some of these are have a difference in terms of how people view these. And so there are notably one of those was breaking out partisanship and seeing how people respond based on whether they identify as a Democrat, a Republican, or an unaffiliated or independent. Notably, one big distinction, the one that Republicans are more likely to attribute as being a major cause of housing being unaffordable, is government regulations. And you can see there's a 35-point gap between Democrats on the one hand and Republicans on the other, indicating that that is a major cause. Of course, our independents are right smack in the middle on that one. We also get some distinctions going the other way, with Democrats more likely to attribute wages not keeping up with rising prices for housing. It's a 26-point difference between Democrats and Republicans on that particular factor. And you can see the others broken out there as well. And then, as well, since renters tended to be the most concerned, having to change their lives in different ways in order to afford rents, you can see that they are far more likely, well, on a number of these, they are more likely to feel like all of these are a major cause in the top three there. But landlords raising rents too much had some of the biggest distinction between homeowners and renters in terms of that view of the cause of unaffordability of housing. So, one thing that we dug into a little bit more this year was experiences with healthcare. And so this is some of my favorite data in the survey. We asked some new questions, broke some new things out in terms of what we were looking at. But we talked about cost, and we noted the cost of healthcare was, Lucia noted, it was viewed as a serious problem. But we also wanted to look at some other factors. We asked them, is it easy or difficult to find or obtain care for them and their family's physical health? We'll talk about mental health and a little bit physical health in their community. Overall, we've got 2/3 saying, yeah, it's at least somewhat easy. But note, it's only 27% that feel like it's very easy to obtain care here. 31% saying it's somewhat or very difficult. I'll note there weren't big distinctions geographically within this. So that's one thing that we looked at and that you can play around in on the website with. But clearly there was concerns whether you were on the Western Slope, whether you were in the Denver metro area. There was, only about a 10-point difference in terms of perceptions there. So that's something interesting within the data. But we wanted to look at satisfaction with a number of aspects in healthcare. No shocker here, given what we saw before, but if we go to the bottom of this list, out-of-pocket costs of healthcare, such as copays and deductibles, was the source of the most dissatisfaction. So 3 in 5 saying they are dissatisfied there. If we go to the top, we had 3/4 for the top 3 saying they are satisfied with either how far they have to travel, quality of care they receive, and the attitude of healthcare providers and other staff towards them and their family. In the middle, we've got about 2/3 saying the ability to see a healthcare provider whenever needed was something they were satisfied with. And then the amount of time that they have to wait, we've got a real deep division there overall. If we look at the next slide, you can see that when we ask them how worried they are projecting into the future, that they or someone in their household will be without coverage, you can see today we've got the highest proportion that we've tracked, 42%, saying that they are worried. So whether that's very worried, also again, the highest proportion, 21% today saying that they are very worried about that individual feature. Notably, that does not cut evenly. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that a majority of those who speak a language other than English, majority of LGBTQ plus population, and that those with a disability are far more likely to say that they are worried than other respondents. On the next slide, we talked about postponing care a little bit. This is showing you the trend lines on those. Again, I mentioned it's about half that say they postpone medical or dental care in 2026. So again, a significant portion of the population, we have 29% that say they postpone mental health care specifically. And if we dig into the latter points, you can see that it's, again, more than a quarter reporting that, but it's, again, significant proportions of a number of different subgroups that we've blocked out here for you. They tend to be somewhat younger, especially women under the age of 50, and therefore they're more likely to be renters, maybe have insurance from parents, or a number of other subgroups, or tend to have young children as well. So that's significant. Why do they feel like they have, sorry, if we can go to the next slide. I've forgotten what the next slide is. Thank you. We did ask them one question that we asked a year ago as well. Among those who have experienced mental health strain, which was a significant portion of the Colorado population, we asked them what had contributed most to their mental health strain. Notably, again, we have political issues in the top tier as being a source of concern. But if we look at financial issues and loan payments and debt combined, that's 35% who are pointing to those more financial related issues as a source of mental health strain. Again, they could point to multiple factors. So they were given these categories and allowed to point to a number of different factors. If we look at this based on those breakouts by race and ethnicity, we'll note that financial issues, especially when you add in some of the concerns about loan payments and debt, tends to pop up considerably with Latino respondents, with those American Indian, Alaska Native, and multiracial groups as well. So something interesting within that data. And then if we look at going back to those that are experiencing mental health strain, notably, they are more likely to say that they're postponing getting any type of care, whether it's physical care or also mental health care, than all Coloradans overall. So you can see outright majorities of those who say they've experienced mental health strain have postponed medical care or dental care, and near majority saying they've postponed mental health care as well. Okay, so I will pass it back to Katie to jump in.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lori and Lucia, for going through this. And so many great questions from folks asking about different specifics around the data or different demographics. Just another reminder that at our website, we do have a beautiful interactive dashboard tableau that will allow you to break down the data by a lot of different demographics, including age, economic status, region of the state, lots of different pieces. And also, I shared my email a couple times. Please also reach out to me because we'll be posting a lot more resources to that website, but also I'm happy to just send you things. So let me know if I can help. I reach out to me because I'm happy to just also send pieces if someone's curious about something they can't find. So we went through a ton of data, a lot of different experiences, but what we wanted to do is also take time to hear from somebody who's working on this every day in Colorado. So we're very, very excited to have Hunter Nelson joining us today. Hunter is here to kind of talk about what the experience is like for people who are actually working on these issues across Colorado. And we're very excited. She is the Colorado director for the Small Business Majority. And Hunter, I'd love to hand it over to you to just hear your perspective. How does this data resonate with what you're seeing in your work every day, particularly in your work to expand economic opportunity for Colorado's small businesses?
It's good. Thank you so much, Katie. And yes, hi everyone. Hunter Nelson, Carter Director of Small Business Majority. We're a national organization dedicated to supporting small business owners, especially those that come from our underrepresented communities, BIPOC small business owners, women small business owners, those in rural communities, but all small business owners as well across the nation and in Colorado. So I'm born and raised here in Colorado. I'm located in Parker, just a little south of Denver. And yeah, I lead all of our work to support small businesses here in our state. And yes, affordability concerns and their impact really stretch across, and are impacting so many of our small business owners. Nearly 750,000 small businesses operate in Colorado. I think the last data I saw is almost 98% of our businesses here in Colorado are considered small businesses. Colorado small business owners are navigating a perfect storm of economic challenges. They want to offer competitive wages and benefits to their employees, but many are being squeezed by higher operating costs while their employees struggle with housing, healthcare, and other basic expenses of daily living. So when our small business owners and then as well as their workers can afford to live in the communities where they work or run their business, and they can't access the healthcare they need, the childcare they need, all these types of things, it really creates real challenges for recruitment, retention, and long-term growth. Small business majority, a big part of our work too, is we also do research as well. And we do a quarterly poll called our Voice of Main Street survey that really kind of supplements some of the data that we are seeing here with the pulse that's just showing that higher costs are, like I said, a huge issue for not just residents, but our small businesses. Our most recent one showed that gas prices, fuel costs, and transportation costs are really are really straining pockets of small business owners and limiting their growth. They report, so many of the folks in our network report that the cost of utilities, cost of raw goods and materials, healthcare premiums. I know we talked a lot about healthcare so far, commercial rent, all these things have increased this year and are really impacting their ability to grow their businesses and also just to stay afloat. I also really think it's important to note tariffs, especially as we're talking about small businesses. Are really straining the pockets of our small business owners, including in Colorado, all the way. I've heard stories from small business owners on the Western Slope who are selling, backpacking gear made for women's bodies to a small business owner on the Eastern Plains up in Sterling who makes potting plants for pots for plants, if I can say that. And then, a construction company, a small construction business in Metro Denver, all being strained by the tariffs as well. And I know that there's a refund process, but none of the small business owners that we work with have reported receiving a refund through this as well. So that's less money when you're having to pay these tariffs. That's less money that's going towards offering things like healthcare to their employees, right? For affording childcare for themselves so that they can continue run their business. Just money that they're investing in their business, raising wages so folks can continue to live in the communities where they work and things like that. So really wanted to mention how tariffs is something that I'm hearing across Colorado and just nationwide as well. That's really impacting affordability as well. And a few other like I said, I'm on the ground connecting with so many small business owners across the state of Colorado, and a few stories I'm going to quickly share that really resonate and I think kind of highlight some of what we've seen in this data. So we have a woman entrepreneur in our network, and she ran a small kind of online business focused on selling sustainable goods, things that were good for products that were good for the community and the environment, household products, things like that were, again, sustainability was a core value to her business. Her and her husband had a child, and the cost of childcare was something that continued to be a huge burden on their family. They eventually just couldn't afford it. So she was trying to balance taking care of her child, but then also running her business at the same time, which you can imagine, especially with her child was very young, that it's hard to balance both those things. And they wanted to grow their family, so they decided to have a second child. And at that point, she had to make the tough decision to close her business, unfortunately, because they just could not afford childcare for one child, much less two. And those trade-offs are unfair, right? Our small business owners should be able to grow their families and then also, grow their companies as well. And same with, here we hear folks with their workers as well who have to climb promotions or leave their jobs, right? Because they can't afford childcare, and that often falls on the women disproportionately. So just highlighting how the cost of childcare, I just had a baby myself and definitely am feeling that now on the personal level, right? The cost of childcare is really a huge affordability challenge. One more story that I'll note in terms of healthcare. I know health insurance is something that we really focused on in this data and that we continue to see. It's one of our biggest pain points we hear from small business owners across Colorado. As a small business owner I work with in rural Eastern Colorado up in Sterling, and they offered for years small group health insurance for their employees. And their employees really appreciated having access to health insurance through their jobs, right? Is something that they really cared about. And something that folks really look at when they're looking at taking a job, right? It makes it contributes to quality employment. Unfortunately, in that region, there was only one insurance carrier. So this carrier could increase the cost significantly of the premiums each year. And the small businesses in that region are kind of stuck in a tough position, right? They have to choose, okay, are we going to absorb these costs and continue to try to offer health insurance, but it's really straining our pockets, right? Or are we going to make the tough decision to drop coverage and therefore our employees no longer have access to it through their job? And how's that going to, again, impact retention as well and recruitment of folks to grow the business? And it had just, prices had continued to rise each year for the small group health plan. And last year they made the really tough decision to drop offering health, small group coverage for their job, for their business to their workers. They were hoping that their folks might have more luck on the individual market, but we're seeing that the individual market's also increasing as well, right? So it's just, those are a couple things that I'll end there. I don't want to take up too much time, but just highlighting sort of how these are also, our small business owners, our small businesses are powering our local economies, right? And they're also being strained by these affordability challenges. It's impacting them, the ability to run their businesses, their workers, and their ability to live in their communities. So I'll stop there. I'll put my email in the chat too if folks have any questions or want to connect. Thanks for having me.
Hunter, thank you so much. We could just have you keep going, because it's so many like fascinating stories. And I think what you've highlighted so beautifully is that intersection that we're all so familiar with between cost of living, cost of healthcare, cost of housing, how all these intersecting impacts really affect day-to-day life for Coloradans. So on the next slide, just some key takeaways. I know we went through like a lot of different things. So just highlighting some of the big picture things that we talked about. Obviously, as we all know far too well, affordability and cost of living remains the top issue in Colorado, and we see that continuing to grow since the launch of Pulse. And it really is becoming kind of a defining issue for this decade in Colorado. And people are looking to state government to address those challenges, but are feeling dissatisfied about their progress so far and being able to make any meaningful inroads around affordability. More financial sacrifices, as we talked about, for Coloradans, people having to cut back on recreational spending, postponing medical, dental care, mental health care. It's really crossing to all demographics of Coloradans are feeling the impact. As we all know too well, housing affordability is an ongoing financial strain, as well as healthcare costs. Even though we saw some data that people are pretty satisfied with the health care that they are receiving in the state where they live, out-of-pocket costs and the increase in healthcare costs continue to really burden Coloradans. So again, that is just like a very high level overview of some of the takeaways today. We have a few minutes. I know we're tight on time, but if folks would like to come off mute, feel free to share a question for Lori or Lucia, our pollsters, or for Hunter. Happy to do that. So yes, and I know Hunter also is going to add her email in the chat. So anyway, I know we had some questions too. I can start us off in the chat about that feeling about frustration with government and politics and how that has trended over time. Lori or Lucia, can one of you talk to that piece about how that may have changed since the launch of the poll in 2020?
I think, go ahead, Lucia.
Well, I'll get started, but Laurie, please jump in with kind of broader context too. I mean, so this is the first year where we have asked those specific questions, but I think what is really telling to me was that open-ended question where we ask people to volunteer the top issue. And in prior years, government and politics, even through we've been doing this through some different presidential administrations, different shifts in government. And it never popped the way it has just in the past 2 years. So I do think, and more in broader terms too, we're seeing it in a national level that there is this dissatisfaction that's kind of reaching a fever pitch. And some of it has to do with kind of political dynamics, but some of it has to do with these bread and butter issues of cost of living and cost of gas and affordability that then kind of are bubbling over into that direction. But Lori, I welcome your perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that in recent primary elections, for example, some of the dissatisfaction taking down a few incumbents in the state. So this isn't a shock because people are very concerned about the cost of living. They're worried about being able to stay in the state, and they're just sensing that perhaps those in charge are not doing enough to address those concerns, as we clearly saw in this data. That's part of the reason we asked these questions this time, is because we have seen these trend lines breaking this direction.
We had another question come through in the chat around the experiences of LGBTQ plus folks and Coloradans and how their experiences may be differing from others, or how things may be impacting them differently. So can you speak to that, sort of how that particular group may be experiencing challenges currently?
Yeah, that's one thing we can break out, and we highlighted it in a couple places that we're seeing that, for example, they are one of the demographics that is most likely to say they've experienced mental health strain, for example. And it's hard to disaggregate some of these dynamics because they're also tending to be engaged in more of the coping mechanisms we talked about in terms of the financial pressures. So, one kind of leads to another in some cases, but yeah, we had 78% of LGBTQ plus tell us that they've experienced anxiety, depression, loneliness, or stress, for example. And that was one of the top subgroups. Lucia, I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I think that was the major distinction that we saw in the data this year.
Yeah. And Lori and Lucia, you do a lot of different polling work, both in Colorado and nationally. Is there anything that came out of the poll this year that surprised you, that you felt like was unexpected, or does it really affirm other pieces that you're seeing in polling work that you're doing?
I think, well, I think Lori, we might say the same thing. I don't know. I think for me, it affirmed a lot of things that I'm seeing nationally, and in other states. I think the thing that jumped out at our team was the intensity of concern around cost of healthcare. We expected, unfortunately, cost of living to be really high. We know cost of housing has been an issue in Colorado, but the intensity of feeling around cost of healthcare, the dissatisfaction with the costs that people are experiencing, the continued extent to which they're postponing care, the concern about losing health insurance, all these things, obviously, given the dynamics that are happening, is not shocking, but it is still shocking, right? To see the extent to which people are living that experience day to day.
Yeah, definitely.
And I would
Lori,
add,
anything you would add? Yeah.
Yeah, just the other thing, it was also in the healthcare realm, was the concern about the long waits to obtain care was something when voters overall, even those who have insurance or even those who aren't as concerned about the cost, are saying they're having to wait. That used to be the one like pushback on a lot of changes in terms of our healthcare policy overall was, well, we don't want to have to wait really long like some of these other countries. And now we've got Coloradans saying, oh yeah, I'm having to wait. I'm experiencing these types of problems and concerned about that, and their satisfaction levels fairly low. So that really stood out to me because that is a portent of wanting a potentially different system.
Sure, definitely. Well, thank you both so much, Lori and Lucia. I know we're at time, so I was just gonna wrap us up. On the next slide, you'll just see we do have a couple other briefings coming up. Invites for these will be coming out early next week. We will do one with a deep dive on healthcare on August 6th with our friends from Colorado Community Health Network. as well as an event that we'll be doing at the end of September, focused specifically on insights from Hispanic and Latino Coloradans. That will be an in-person event at the Health Foundation, and it will be offered in Spanish with live interpretation in English. So look out for invites for both of those. Please visit our website to get all of the data. Like we said, we only were able to go through a very tip of the iceberg, so there's a lot more to explore. And that is my email address. Please reach out to me. We're happy to do briefing presentations for anyone who may be interested or provide data where we can. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for learning about Pulse, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.